Thank you, Angela. My name is Eileen. I'm from Ernst & Young. Okay, I'm also a subcommittee member of ISCA AGS1 subcommittee. Okay, I'll now bring you through the second part of the presentation, which will be focusing on AUP. Okay, AUP is a short form for Agreed Upon Procedures. Okay, so what is an AUP engagement? Right, an AUP engagement is one where the practitioner is engaged to carry out those procedures agreed upfront between the practitioner. Engaging party for this morning's context would be the grantee, right? And intended users, grantor. And then after that, there will be a report on the findings. Okay. The purpose of agreeing the procedures upfront, okay, is to ensure that the specific objectives and the needs, right, okay, are being met for the engagement. So in a way, you think about like everybody agree upfront, what are the procedures to be performed? Okay, and then later on, after performing the procedures, there will be a report provided to the grantee and the users, okay, of which you can take a look at the findings, all right? So one thing to note is while there is no conclusion provided, okay, the engaging party and intended users can benefit from the findings to help form their own conclusion. So based on the findings from the report, you can then assess whether it meets the terms and conditions, whether it has been complied with or met for the grant itself. Okay, so what are the characteristics of an AUP engagement? Like I mentioned just now, the procedures are specific and are agreed upfront, okay, with the grantee's acknowledgement, and that the procedures performed are appropriate for the purpose of the engagement. So typically, right, this will be done by way of listing down the procedures, including the engagement letter, right, between the practitioner and the grantee itself. Okay, so unlike in an assurance engagement, the grantor would have visibility over the nature, extent, and timing of the procedures to be performed. So 3 big words over there. So some of you may wonder, what do I mean by nature? Okay, so nature in a way talks about the kind of evidence, okay, the type of work to be done. Okay, so it can be referring to requesting confirmations, inspecting documents, or vouching documents. Okay, just some examples. All right. Then extent would be the extent of evidence that you will want the practitioner to gather for this piece of work, right? So we can be talking about quantitative value, we can be talking about scope, sample size, coverage, you want 75%, 100%, top 5 highest value items, etc. Okay? Timing will be when the procedures will be performed. So all these, will be stated out in the procedures to be performed and then agreed upfront. Okay? So in conducting an AUP engagement, right, the need for the practitioner to exercise professional judgment is limited, okay, because the standard itself require nature, timing, and extent of the procedures to be described objectively in terms that are clear, not misleading, and not subject to varying interpretations. Okay, we will go a bit further down later on. I have some examples that we can use to illustrate. Okay, so this will also mean that it should be described at a level specific enough for the practitioner and the grantor to understand the procedures performed, okay, including in situation whereby there are quantitative threshold to be applied for determining and reporting exceptions. Okay. Okay, so here is an example of how procedures are described and findings are reported in the AUP report. So before that, I want to draw your attention to the right-hand side box, the one with the little light bulb over there. Okay, just to highlight to you the guiding principle when describing procedures. Okay, so it is for someone other than the practitioner, okay, maybe you, all right, is able to re-perform the procedures indicated on the report of findings and also obtain the same results as though obtained by the practitioner. So if you look at this, the way the procedures are to be described has to be clear, not subject to different interpretation by different parties. Okay, so if you look at the first one, right, item 1, we use the word agree. So pretty straightforward, pretty clear, right? And I'm agreeing what? What am I agreeing? Amount, description, details. And over here, details, we put bracket. Dates of involvement, maybe it can be employment date, resignation date, right? Okay, so I'm agreeing these few items, okay, from A to B, right? So your A in this case here is your statement, maybe the statement of expenditure, or the statement of claim, right, to the original source documents, B, okay, so it can be original source documents here, indicated here, or other records like your invoices, delivery orders, or payroll records, or even commissioning certificates. So these are listed down. So we are clear on what you want the petitioner to agree on. Okay. So something interesting to note, like the second part of the paragraph, right? There was this part that says, in the absence of original source documents, okay, there is like a follow-up step to be done. Okay, trace to certified true copies by the grantee's authorized signatories. Okay, so this is an example of the procedures. Perform already, the practitioner will include them and report in the findings. Okay, so over here, the example, okay, we agreed the amount, description and details of 45 items claimed. So there are 45, okay, to invoices and delivery documents. There are 3, okay, that there are no original source document. We agreed to the certified true copies. So we mention it here, okay. And then the last part, all right, there is a difference noted because basically A cannot agree to B, right? So it's been highlighted here. Okay, we say that we found the amount claimed of X dollars in the statement differs from the amount in the invoice of Y dollars. Okay, so we report all these. This report is given to the users. Okay, we read it. Okay, then we can then form our own conclusions on it. Okay. Another thing that I want to touch on is the independence requirement, which Angela went on briefly. Okay, so for an AUP engagement, right, because the procedures are agreed upfront with the grantor, any perceived self-review and management participation threats are mitigated. Therefore, typically, it is not necessary, okay, for the practitioner to comply with independence requirement. But that being said, okay, for the grantor, if you have certain independence requirements or certain considerations, you can still indicate for the practitioner to meet those independence requirements. So on the slide here, we have included like 2 examples. For example, for the practitioner to not provide accounting and bookkeeping services, or not the grantee itself or related parties. Okay, I have about 4 slides talking about examples. Okay, because I'm sure some of you will be wondering, what are some terms that you think has okay, clear, some terms that are very subjective, unclear. And also I have about 4 slides that give you a flavor of this. Okay, so the first one will be a description of procedures that are deemed acceptable. Okay, so if you look at the first one, very clear cut. Okay, confirm with management that the information reported is complete. Typically, we will get a confirmation, right? Second one, agree, trace or compare the amount from A to B. Very straightforward, okay? C, next one, inspected supporting documents. Then we also include what are the kind of supporting documents that you want the practitioner to check, right? Inquiry with management that policies relating to processes have been implemented. Next one is on recomputation. Also very straightforward. A plus B equals to C or A divided by B, right? Then we report to you the results of that. And then the last one, observe that an asset reported exists, like citing that at a point in time the asset exists. Okay. Okay, the next few slides are the more tricky ones. Okay, that usually sometimes the practitioner, when we see these, we will go back and we will tell the grantee, no, we cannot have all these in the AUP procedures. So let me try to explain to you why, okay? So, okay, the reminder here is AUP engagements do not provide assurance. So in our procedures and our report, we cannot use words or terms that suggest the assurance has been provided because this will not be factual. We also don't want the users to have undue reliance on the report. Okay, so there are no assurance, okay? So some examples like words like present fairly, true and fair, audit, review, assurance, opinion and conclusion. These are terms that are associated with assurance. So we cannot use them in the AUP report. Okay, an example here will be review cost allocation to determine if they are reasonable. So review, typically there's a conclusion kind of assurance given to it. Reasonable, party A and party B, my threshold of reasonableness may be different depending on our expectations, right? The bottom part, the one, certain terms that imply expression of assurance, opinion, or conclusion, like certified, verified, ascertained, or ensured, also cannot be used and not appropriate Okay, because this would mean that the subject matter is subjected to an assurance engagement. Okay. Okay, so this slide is also again on some not so good examples. Okay, terms that may be unclear, misleading, right? So we will avoid, we usually won't put a procedures or have a procedures that say to obtain all the explanations and perform such procedures as we considered necessary. So if you remember just now, I point to you that that guiding principle, right? The same set of procedures, another person other than the practitioner, if they were to do it, we should arrive at the same results, right? But if you look at, if I have a procedure that say, go and obtain all the explanations and perform procedures considered necessary. Again, my threshold and your threshold could be different. I may do 10, you may do 9. Okay. Or I may ask 10 questions, you may ask 9 questions. Yeah. Then the next one on words like material, significant, reasonable. These are subject to varying interpretations. We also do not use. Because when you talk about material and significant, are you talking about qualitative dollar value? Or do you also have some qualitative consideration in mind? Right? Then the next one, terms like discuss, evaluate, test, analyze, examine. Okay, without specifying the nature and the extent in the procedures, right? These are deemed as imprecise description. For example, if we just say discuss, okay, but we did not specify who you want the discussion to be, who to discuss with, and what questions to ask, again, is rather vague, right? Then the last one, okay, wordings like in our view, from our perspective, we take the position. These are terms to be avoided because they do not reflect findings. Okay, I have last slide on one more example. So this one are procedures that are considered unclear. Like the first two, right? Check for compliance with the terms and conditions of the grant award letter. Check that qualifying costs incurred are strictly and directly for the purpose of the project. So sometimes these, without elaborating or specifying the type of procedures to be performed, just by looking at these two sentences again, we may have different expectations. Then we may expect different procedures to be performed in order to check that. Okay. Then the last one, the third one, check that the description and authenticity of items claimed are valid by agreeing to appropriate source documents and other records. The word authenticity may be misinterpreted by users to mean that the source document inspected are real and genuine, even though the practitioner will not be able to determine whether the documents are real or fake. Okay. All right, so before we move on to the Q&A part, maybe the exciting part for all of you, I have 2 more slides, okay, just sharing some food for thoughts for y'all to consider. Because after hearing from Angela and myself, you may be wondering, when do I want to use reasonable assurance or limited assurance? So we have included some factors over here on the slide for you to consider. First of all will be information needs of intended users. Consider the degree of confidence required in the subject matter. If you need a high level of confidence, you may want to go for reasonable assurance. Maybe the grantee is in a very highly regulated entities, for example. Okay. Next one is some subject matter, the complexity of the subject matter and the significance. Maybe, for example, the grant amount, the quantum is large, is huge. Then you may want more assurance. Okay. But that being said, okay, if you look at the bottom left-hand side box, right? If there are other controls in place that can help you to monitor the compliance of the grantee, then you may not need reasonable assurance. Maybe limited will do. Okay. The other one will be cost considerations. Okay. Limited assurance may be more appropriate if cost is a key thing to consider. Okay. And the other way to look at it is if you want a reasonable assurance, you may want to consider whether this commensurate with the risk of non-compliance. Okay. So then after going through, you may then ask, what is the value of AUP if it does not provide any assurance to the grantor? Okay. So it is still beneficial, okay, because in the AUP engagement, right, it's very specific. We all come together upfront and then you specify, the grantor can specify the kind of procedures that they want to perform, right? So it will be meaningful and beneficial if the grantor requires performance of specific procedures, okay, over an area or requires a certain level of coverage. So an example, if the grantor want to focus on whether amounts claimed are for purchases made from local vendors, not just general vendors, right? Local vendors, and they want to determine that a certain percentage is an acceptable rate for it. So to do this, can design a procedures to check that the amounts claimed are agreed to supplier invoices with local address. Okay, and then prescribe the coverage that you want. Okay, so with these, okay, the grantor identify focus area, practitioner carry out the checks, the procedures objectively, basically, and grantor saves time and resources. Then there is a report on findings for you to form your conclusions, your own results, right? So it is still beneficial. So it really depends at the end of the day, what is the objective that you want to achieve, right? Okay. With that, I will pass over to Mei. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Angela and Elaine.